What if a man's greatest weakness isn't found in his heart, his fears, or his past, but in the parts of himself he's never dared to face? What if the true soft spot within every man isn't visible, isn't spoken, and yet silently governs how he loves, how he breaks, and how he disappears without warning? We are told men are logical, composed, driven by reason. We are taught to believe they are strong because they hide emotion, because they endure, because they don't collapse when the world turns cruel. But Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who dared to explore the unconscious like no one before him, warned us of another truth. He believed a man's true vulnerability lies not in what the world can see, but in what he cannot see within himself. The most dangerous place is not outside, it is within. You see, every man carries an image inside him, an image he did not choose, a silent imprint shaped by culture, childhood experience, and absence. Jung called this the animate inner feminine, and it is through this anima that a man experiences love, desire, longing, and sometimes devastation. It is also through this inner image that he projects, attaches, idolizes, and falls apart. But here's where it gets haunting. Most men don't even know this anima exists. They think they fall in love with a woman. In reality, they fall into a psychological mirror, a projection of what they lack, what they long for, what they have buried. And when that image begins to fade, when the real person steps out from behind the fantasy, collapse begins. So, what is the truth behind a man's weak spot? It is not his fear of loss. It is not his past heartbreaks. It is not even his pride. It is the unconscious pattern that chooses love not because it is right, but because it feels familiar. Carl Jung saw this not as failure, but as invitation. Because within that weakness lies the path to becoming whole. In this video, we are not here to criticize men. We are here to understand them and perhaps to understand ourselves. Because what Jung uncovered was not just a theory about men, it was a revelation about all of us. And if you stay with me, we are going to explore the truth you felt but never had words for. Until now, Carl Jung did not view a man's weakness as a flaw to be hidden. He saw it as a doorway, a threshold into something deeper, more essential, and often terrifying to face. For Jung, the true weak spot in a man is not where he breaks down, it is where he refuses to look. It is the blind spot, the part of himself that he has never examined, never questioned, never named. And that part often holds immense power over his thoughts, his choices, and his relationships. At the center of Jung's insight is the idea that the human psyche is not a flat, rational system. It is layered, ancient, symbolic. There is the conscious mind, what a man believes he knows about himself. But beneath that is a vast ocean of unconscious content. Memories, wounds, desires, archetypes. This is where the anima lives. This is where his inner feminine energy, his capacity for emotion, intuition, vulnerability, and imagination resides. And for many men, that space is unexplored, unclaimed, disconnected. So what happens when a man lives his life cut off from this inner world? He becomes fragmented. He may appear successful, decisive, controlled on the surface, but there is an emotional imbalance within him. He may struggle with intimacy, react to criticism with anger, or find himself repeatedly drawn to partners who awaken something intense but undefined. He doesn't realize it, but he is not choosing love freely. He is being pulled by unconscious patterns. That is the weak spot. Jung believed that men are conditioned from early childhood to suppress anything deemed feminine. To cry is weakness. To doubt is weakness. To feel too deeply is weakness. But by cutting off those traits, they also sever the connection to parts of their own psyche. This creates a void. And nature, Jung warned, does not tolerate a void for long. What is repressed in the psyche will return not as a gentle whisper but as fate, as obsession, as heartbreak, as a pattern that repeats until it is understood. This is why Jung placed so much emphasis on the process of individuation, the journey of becoming whole. Not perfect, not masculine in the conventional sense, but whole. To individuate, a man must confront his unconscious. He must meet the anima, not as fantasy or escape, but as a symbol of the emotional truth he has avoided. And in doing so, he begins to reclaim the parts of himself he once rejected. The weak spot, then, is not a point of failure. It is the place of initiation. It is where a man can begin the work of transformation, if he is willing to be honest. To stop performing strength and start embodying presence, to stop chasing illusions and start integrating what was hidden. Jung did not see this weakness as something to fix, but as something to feel. because only when it is felt can it be understood, and only when it is understood can it be healed. There is a moment in a man's life when something unexpected happens. He meets someone, a woman, a stranger, a presence, and suddenly he is no longer in control. He cannot explain why he is drawn to her. It is not just attraction, it is not just charm, it is something older, something deeper, something that seems to bypass logic and go straight into the soul. This is the anima at work. Carl Jung described the anima as the unconscious feminine within every man. It is not a personality trait. It is not a behavior. It is an archetype, an inherited psychic image that forms during early development, shaped by his experiences with the women in his life and the cultural myths that define femininity. But the anima is more than memory. It is emotional energy. It is imagination, sensitivity, intuition, creativity, empathy. And in most men it lies dormant. That is, until something wakes it up. When a man meets a woman who resembles his inner feminine image, whether in essence, energy, or emotion, his anima responds. Not with reason, but with recognition. The connection feels instant, intense, even irrational. He may feel as if he has known her forever. He may believe she is the one, but what he is truly seeing is not her. It is the image she activates within him. The anima becomes projected onto her, and in that projection, she becomes more than a person. She becomes a symbol, a mirror, a portal. This is why the attraction can feel so overwhelming. He is not just attracted to her outer presence, he is drawn to the part of himself that she reflects, the part he has lost, neglected, or never known. And the pull is magnetic. It is a silent force that grabs hold of him not through logic, but through the unconscious. He sees in her what he has longed for: emotional aliveness, intimacy, connection. The freedom to feel without shame, the softness he has denied, the wildness he has buried. But this awakening comes with risk. Because he is not falling in love with the real woman, he is falling in love with his anima, with his own inner world. And unless he becomes aware of this dynamic, he may idealize her. He may put her on a pedestal. He may expect her to fulfill something she never agreed to carry. The relationship becomes unbalanced. The moment she reveals her human flaws or deviates from the image he has projected, the illusion begins to collapse. Jung warned that this kind of projection is dangerous because it turns another human being into a symbol, and when the symbol breaks, the pain is sharp, the disappointment is deep. The man feels betrayed, but the betrayal was never hers. It was his unconscious expectation finally meeting reality. He thought he found completion. What he found was a mirror, and mirrors do not lie. Still, this confrontation can be transformative. If the man recognizes that what he loved was not her, but the anima she awakened, he can begin the work of integration. He can turn inward. He can ask, what does she reflect in me? What have I lost touch with? What qualities am I being called to reclaim? In this way, the anima becomes not just a source of projection, but a guide, a teacher, a bridge to inner wholeness. Jung believed that the anima's true gift is not in who she appears to be in the outer world, but in who she invites a man to become in his inner world. The woman who awakens the anima is not always meant to stay. Sometimes, she appears only to open a door, to stir what has long been still, to remind him that he is more than his strength, his logic, his silence. She shows him what he has forgotten, and then she leaves him with the question, are you ready to meet yourself? There is a truth many men do not want to admit, not even to themselves. It is uncomfortable, unsettling, and yet it explains why so many relationships begin with intensity and end in silence. The truth is, most men do not fall in love because they are whole. They fall in love because something inside them is missing. They do not choose love from abundance. They are pulled toward it from lack. Carl Jung believed that the human psyche is always seeking balance. What we repress, we eventually project. What we lack, we instinctively chase. And for many men, what is missing lies not on the outside, but in their inner world. They grow up in systems that reward control, logic, and emotional restraint. They are taught to be providers, protectors, decision makers. But no one teaches them how to feel. No one teaches them how to be with pain, with softness, with vulnerability. Over time, this disconnection from the emotional self becomes normal. The man appears strong, composed, independent, but inside he carries an emptiness, a silent absence of feeling. And when he meets someone who seems to embody the qualities he has lost, the attraction feels instant, even fated. She is not just beautiful. She is warm. She listens. She feels deeply. She brings color to his gray. Without knowing it, he sees in her what he cannot access in himself. This is why love, for many men, begins with awe. She becomes the missing piece, the answer to an unspoken longing. And yet, this is where the danger lies. Because when love is driven by inner absence, it turns the other person into a function, something to fix the gap, to fill the hole, to carry what he cannot carry himself. He may call it passion, he may believe it is destiny, but it is dependency disguised as devotion. Jung warned that relationships born from lack are not truly about the other person, they are about what the psyche is trying to complete. The woman becomes a symbol of healing, of comfort, of wholeness. And as long as she fits that image, the bond remains strong. But the moment she fails to meet the fantasy, when she becomes human and imperfect, the illusion begins to unravel. The man feels betrayed, confused, even resentful. He does not understand what changed. But what changed was not her. What changed was the spell of projection breaking. This is why some men lose interest suddenly, why others become distant without warning. When the fantasy fades, they are left with the truth: the woman was never meant to fix them. She was never responsible for their emptiness. And without the emotional tools to face that void, they withdraw. Not because they do not care, but because they do not know how to stay when love is no longer a cure, but a mirror. But there is another path. A man can choose to stop chasing what he lacks and begin developing it within himself. If he admires her softness, can he cultivate his own? If he is drawn to her emotional depth, can he learn to feel without fear? Jung called this the work of integration, bringing the rejected parts of the self back into consciousness. When a man learns to embody what he once outsourced to love, he stops seeking women to complete him. He begins to meet them as equals. The truth is not that love is wrong. The truth is that love reveals what is incomplete. And when a man is willing to see this not as failure but as invitation, he begins the real journey. Not to possess her, but to meet himself through her. Not to cling to what she gives, but to awaken what she reflects. This is not the love of fairy tales. It is the love of growth. The love that does not just soothe a man's loneliness, but calls him to become whole. What if the person you think you love is not who they truly are, but who you need them to be? What if the connection you feel, the obsession you defend, and the story you hold so tightly are not about them at all? Carl Jung called this projection a psychological phenomenon in which we unconsciously cast parts of ourselves onto others. And in romantic love, projection is not rare. It is the rule. When you meet someone and feel something powerful, something immediate and beyond reason, it is tempting to call it chemistry, destiny, a soul connection. But often, what you are experiencing is your own inner world being reflected back to you. The qualities you crave, the emotions you repress, the wounds you carry, they all find a mirror in the other person. And without knowing it, you begin to fill in the blanks with your unconscious desires. This is not conscious. That is what makes it so dangerous. You are not choosing this person for who they are. You are choosing them for who they allow you to be, for what they activate, what they represent, what they rescue in you. You do not fall in love with them. You fall in love with the image you have created. And that image was shaped long before they ever appeared in your life. Jung observed that the psyche longs for wholeness. And when we are disconnected from parts of ourselves, whether softness, creativity, courage, or emotional depth, we project those traits onto others. In love, this projection often falls on someone who unconsciously fits the shape of what is missing. They become the symbol, the missing piece, the light in the shadow. And for a while, it feels real. But symbols cannot sustain relationship. People are not archetypes, and sooner or later, the real person will step out from behind the image. They will make mistakes. They will fail to read your mind. They will not live up to the story you told yourself about them. And when that happens, the illusion begins to fracture. This is where pain enters. Not because the person did something wrong, but because they stopped reflecting what you needed to see. What you thought was love becomes confusion. The emotional high becomes withdrawal. The passion turns into silence. You say they changed. But what changed was your ability to maintain the projection. Jung warned that when projection ends, disillusionment begins. And disillusionment is not the end of love, it is the beginning of something more honest. If you can see the person for who they truly are, beyond your inner story, then something new becomes possible. Real connection. Not based on fantasy, but on presence. Not built on projection, but on mutual recognition. However, most people never reach that point. They chase the next projection, the next high, the next person who can play the role. They move from face to face, searching for someone who can carry their unconscious material, unaware that what they are truly seeking is not love but self-reunion. This is the painful truth. You do not love them. You love the reflection of what you have not yet accepted in yourself. You love the potential they stir in you, the healing they promise, the dreams they seem to fulfill. And until you own those parts of yourself, you will keep falling for your own projection. But this truth is also freeing, because once you understand the pattern, you can change it. You can begin to pull back your projections, not to disconnect, but to relate more truthfully. You can ask, who is this person really? What are they showing me about myself? What do I want them to carry that I must now hold on my own? Projection is not a mistake. It is a map. It points you toward the work you have not done. And love, when it is stripped of illusion, becomes not less magical but more sacred, because now you are not chasing symbols. You are meeting a person. And in doing so, you are finally meeting yourself. There is a moment in a man's life when everything begins to fall apart. It may not be visible from the outside. He may still go to work, speak politely, even smile when expected, but something within him has fractured. And often, it begins when he is forced to face what he has spent a lifetime avoiding: his shadow. Carl Jung described the shadow as the part of the psyche that holds everything we reject, deny, or disown. It contains not only our darkness, but also our unlived potential, our suppressed emotions, our deepest fears. And for men, this shadow is often vast, because from a young age, they are taught to cut off large parts of themselves. Do not cry, do not need, do not fail, do not feel. Instead, they are conditioned to be strong, rational, and in control. They build their identity around competence, decisiveness, and success. And for a time, this mask works. It earns respect, it creates safety, but it also disconnects them from their inner life. The pain is buried, the wounds are ignored, the shadow grows. Then something happens. A relationship ends, a business fails. A child says, "I don't know who you are," or perhaps nothing happens at all except the slow ache of meaninglessness. And in that silence, the shadow begins to surface. He feels anger he cannot explain, shame he cannot speak, a sense of collapse that logic cannot fix. He has hit something within himself that cannot be solved, only seen. Jung believed that this confrontation with the shadow is not a breakdown. It is a breakthrough in disguise. But most men do not see it that way. They resist, they deny, they try harder. They double down on control. But the more they tighten their grip, the more the shadow pushes back. The fear of failure turns into paralysis. The fear of weakness turns into rage. The fear of being unloved turns into isolation. This is where many men begin to crumble, not because they are weak, but because they have been strong for too long in all the wrong ways. They have lived in a way that avoids inner pain, and now the pain demands to be felt. The mask begins to slip, the armor begins to crack, and what lies beneath is not shameful. It is human, but facing the shadow is terrifying. It means admitting that you are not who you thought you were. It means acknowledging the damage you have done, the parts of yourself you have betrayed, the emotions you have suppressed. It means grieving the boy inside you who was never allowed to be soft, confused, or afraid. It means letting go of control and stepping into uncertainty. Yet within that descent is the possibility of transformation. Jung taught that the shadow is not the enemy. It is the doorway. If a man can stay present with what hurts without fleeing, blaming, or numbing, begins to integrate, he begins to reclaim his lost wholeness. He becomes not a man who is perfectly composed, but a man who is deeply real. This process does not happen quickly. It often begins in silence, in shame, in the quiet collapse behind closed doors. But over time, if he allows it, something begins to emerge. A kind of strength that is not about dominance but depth. A kind of confidence that does not need control. A kind of love that is no longer afraid of being known. Men fall apart not because they are broken, but because they are being invited into truth. The shadow is not here to destroy them, it is here to awaken them. And the man who chooses to turn toward that darkness, to face his wounds, to feel what he has spent his life avoiding, he does not lose his power, he discovers it. Not in the image he shows the world, but in the truth he is finally ready to carry. A man's weakest point is not his heart. It is not the fear of being left, or the pain of rejection, or the sorrow of love lost. It is something much quieter, much harder to name. His true vulnerability lives in the space he cannot see, the part of himself that has never been spoken aloud. It is the unnamed, the unknown, the unconscious. Carl Jung understood that what we cannot name still controls us. And for many men, their inner life remains unspoken territory. They know how to act, how to perform, how to protect, but they do not always know how to feel. They do not have the words, not because they are incapable of emotion, but because they were never taught the language for it. So they carry a weight they cannot describe. They live with a wound that has no name. This is the most dangerous place in the male psyche, not the heart, but the blind spot. The place where emotion turns into silence, where longing becomes withdrawal, where confusion is hidden behind logic, and the world does not see it. The world often praises the man who stays composed, who does not cry, who moves on quickly. But that praise is built on misunderstanding. Because the silence is not strength, it is survival. The moment a man begins to name what he feels, to say, I am lost, I am angry, I am afraid, I do not know who I am, the moment he begins to reclaim himself. Not because speaking solves everything, but because it interrupts the spell. It brings light to the part of him that has been living in shadow. It begins the work of integration. This is why his weakest spot is not where he breaks. It is where he refuses to look. And the work of healing is not in becoming someone new. It is in becoming honest. To turn inward, to bring language to what has been silent, to feel what has been buried. Because once a man can name what lives inside him, it no longer holds power over him. It becomes part of him. And in that act of naming, the weakness becomes strength. The silence becomes truth. And the man becomes whole. If something in this journey has stirred something in you, pause for a moment. Not to react, not to analyze, but simply to notice. What came up for you while listening? Did a face appear, a memory, a quiet ache you thought had long gone silent? Sometimes the most powerful realizations are not loud. They come in whispers. They come in stillness. Carl Jung believed that self-awareness is not about becoming someone better. It is about remembering who you already are beneath the noise, the masks, the expectations. And for many men, the path to wholeness begins not with grand gestures, but with quiet recognition. The recognition that the parts they once buried, the emotion, the softness, the confusion, were never weaknesses. They were simply waiting to be seen. You do not have to have all the answers. You do not need to fix everything in one day, but you can begin with a breath, with a word, with a choice to stay present with what is true, even if it is uncomfortable. That is where transformation begins, not outside, but within. If this message resonated with you, let it be the start of a deeper conversation. Share in the comments what part of this spoke to you most. You are not alone in these questions, and sometimes speaking your truth helps someone else find theirs. If you feel called to revisit this, save it. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, pass it on. This space is not just about learning, it is about remembering. And in that remembering, we find each other. Until next time, stay with what is real. Stay with yourself. That is where all healing begins.